Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Portier with another episode of the In Focus podcast. And today, as usual, I'm going to have our guest tell us his name and spell it for us, please, because it's important. It's one of those things where it's audio, you didn't hear it quite right. There was some interruption or whatever. And it's amazing how many people, well, my name, Fortier, you think that would be simple enough to write or remember? Frontier, Fortin, Fournier, I mean, it's all over the map. So with that in mind, go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Filipe Miguel. And yes, my name actually gets spelled wrong all the time. It's actually spelled Filipe. And last name is Miguel, Miguel. And it's interesting that you say that because I don't think anyone's ever spelt my name right, ever. So, and they always spell it with an E, or they use PH or double L's, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I've seen, in fact, I believe Philippe, he runs the brewery up in Norwood. I'm blanking out on it all of a sudden, but it's Philippe with two L's, but spelled with an F.
Sure.
So it's all over the board,
It
and then
is.
Miguel. So some people though who are, have some language talent, are probably just like, well, yeah, but that's your middle name. What's your last name?
Right. Yeah, I have two first names.
Yeah, the boy.
Pretty common, right?
Yeah, the boy with two first names. Yeah, that's an old John Prine song, I think. But Philippe, just before we started rolling, I told you that I had seen your work, and I was like wowed by it. It's different. It's not. I don't know how you say this without. I don't know how to say it without seeming like I'm casting aspersions on other people's work locally, but your work doesn't look like it belongs here, and I mean that in the greatest sense possible.
Well, it's really flattering, and I'm humbled by that. If it in the sort of nicest sense of the way, But I just I don't know. I don't know if I have an explanation that wouldn't involve hours of where this stuff comes from. Other than I definitely enjoy stepping into the studio with an open mind, and I definitely enjoy exploring. And I never sit idly by. So I might end up switching up my mediums. I might fall in love with a material or a technique for a certain amount of time because it presents so many problems for me, that it's, and I feel I'm a little bit torn because I want to do the material right. So I would want to use it in a way that shows a certain level of craft or understanding. I don't want to say mastery, because artists spend their entire lives mastering one craft or a medium, and I admire that. It's just not me, and maybe that's in the sort of the shortest way possible an explanation for why maybe some of my work is a little different, or that I jump around.
Yeah. So let's go back to, almost like to day one. We all have our Genesis story. There are
Mhm.
people who I've interviewed on this show who actually remember the very first drawing they ever made, which is absolutely, incredible. And there are other people who didn't get, to use a new term now, woke for quite a long time. They messed around, but it was never with any intention of any sort. They just needed to mess around, whether it was doodling or sketching or whatever, until one day, the light bulb went on. When was your moment?
Um, I mean, I remember drawing when I was little. I would watch, the TV shows. I watched Captain Bob was one that I think was up. I think it was like at 6 in the morning or something. I would wake up to watch and draw along. And then, Bob Ross. I would watch Bob Ross, and then in school, I just, grew to love art more. But I think my earlier work where I knew that I wanted to do something with my artwork. I was pulling from, my culture. So growing up in a Portuguese home, and traveling every year or so, every other year or so back to Portugal and keeping in touch with my extended family, my relatives, and also photographing, the hills, the valleys. My parents came from a very rural background. Um, so, and they would tell me stories, right? Out of, you know,
You can't be
to,
Portuguese without stories.
I mean, they would tell me stories to make sure that I appreciated everything I had. You know, no running water, no bathrooms. My dad would brag about like taking a dump in the woods and finding a smooth rock. And I'm like, just,
Yeah.
you know, we have it pretty good.
Yeah. My
So,
cousin Joe, when he came over, he must have been 9 or 10 at the time. So, he and I think three of his siblings, they were the last of, a gazillion kids, but they were the oldest ones. So they came over last. They stayed with family in Caldas da Rainha is where they were.
mhm,
And so now they had to be a festa because, there's got to be that big party, and that's more food than an entire block could eat
yeah,
in a week. So we were told, go and wash your hands. So I'll never forget this. We go into the bathroom to wash our hands. I turn on the faucet. Now this is still a three-decker back then, so there's only one faucet. That was cold water. That was it. But anyway, that's
yeah.
another story. I turn on the water to start to lather my hands, and he freaks and he goes, "Hey!" and he shuts it off. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "We're gonna have to go get more." Right?
Oh, that's true.
Isn't that true? Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's again part of the stories.
Yeah.
Visiting my grandparents. They had a mule. They had uh, I forget what you call those. They're like metal containers that you'd fill with water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty big. I forget
Like
the name.
cisterns. Yeah, bilhas, I think they're called in
Yeah.
Portuguese. Yeah.
And I remember that
Oh,
if I wanted to
barocas.
drink,
Barocas. That's yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
if I wanted to drink a water at my grandfather's house, he would give me this cork, cork thing. I mean, I call it a thing. What do you call that? A
A
cork,
ladle?
a ladle,
Yeah.
in your hand, and
Yeah.
that I remember even right now, like what it felt. Uh, you know,
Oh boy, you're there. You're there. So was there anybody else in the family that was, you know, an artist or
oh yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. Geez, you're right. Um, so my sister also liked to draw. My sister went to school for art too. So I ended up going to UMass Dartmouth, and I went there. My sister went to Mass Art, but she didn't finish. She went the route of gonna have a family,
Mhm.
you know. But I kept going. Yeah, it took me a second. You're bringing back.
I know, I could see your face. You were gone. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you're still there. I can tell it's pulling at you. Yeah, yeah. It's funny
Well,
because,
I was just gonna say
yeah,
it because when you had asked, where did the work come from?
mhm,
Those first drawings and those first paintings were really just watercolors of landscapes. They were portraits of family members. They were that kind of early sort of work that you do as an artist. Um, but yeah, there was a definite pull, towards culture. That it's the best way to describe it. But
yeah, yeah. Now, one of the things I found too, and I don't really think it's been discovered, is Portuguese surrealism.
mm,
And it's still, the vestiges of it, and it's still there. I mean, very, very heavily. Crusader Seixas just passed away. He was about a year short of his 100th birthday. And he was like one of the masters of it. And it's absolutely phenomenal, the psychological aspect of Portuguese surrealism. Even there's an abstracted form of surrealism as well. And it's almost like, well, you go to Rockport or Gloucester or whatever, and you see the boats in the water as a motif #1 or whatever. It's
yeah,
almost the same handprint or footprint, or whatever you want to call it over there.
that's interesting. I definitely felt like the art that I saw over the years in Portugal. I feel like there's a definite. I don't know if it's an appreciation for surrealism, and I would see it in artists' work all the time. And the Algarve is not like, there aren't too many places, especially in the last 15 years or so, 20 years or so.
Mhm.
Every time I would go, I would be hungry to find maybe a gallery or some new art, something that would be interesting. And there's a lot of the same type of romanticized landscapes, seascapes. There's a lot of that, and there's a lot of these sort of romanticized portraiture. But what
Yes.
I did notice is that there is a definite appreciation for surrealism, and maybe it has to do with that.
As we're speaking, and I'm thinking, and then your reaction about how you just like looped totally out. I mean, you were gone emotionally, which is interesting. But there's also, and you can't get away from the culture. My mother's Portuguese. She was born here, but the family returned, like a lot of them did, during the Depression, because you were poor here, but you were rich there with the
Right.
same money you had here.
Sure.
And she was also Felicia, so I grew up surrounded with that. And I'm wondering if the surrealism isn't the visual version of Father.
Well, I think that you make a good point. I think it's an interesting one. And I think that the nature of Fado and Portuguese culture um, is sort of expressive in emotion, and so that's why I think that my path in my work in general has had a lot of emotion in the work. I probably could say that there have been many times where my work has been driven by strong emotions, expressive qualities. I think of Fado, and I think of, that sad ballad that Fado is, that speaks to, uh, the sort of struggle, the Portuguese struggle,
Right.
being an immigrant, or living a hard life, uh,
Loneliness.
all that. And maybe surrealism, I think, yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing those paintings, so I'm not sure which ones you're talking about. You're
Right.
probably seeing something, but I can definitely see that, um, as an escape, maybe as an escape into, this kind of otherworldly, imaginative sort of dreamscape.
Mhm.
I can see that would be a direction,
Yeah.
for Portuguese artists, for
Right.
sure.
Plus the thing too is, I mean, you got to give credit where credit is due as far as language writing. It's an incredible, incredible language, and the poets, the Portuguese poets. I mean,
Right,
just now in the last 20 years, the world has recognized Portuguese writers,
right.
as being foremost in their field. So culture does have an enormous amount to do with it. Um, you were born in France.
Yeah.
Do you have memories of that? I mean, not being born.
Uh, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I have like, I only have like bits and pieces. I have like
What part of it was, by the way?
um, so I was born in Paris, but I still have family in Paris. I think they now since retired. I have like maybe a couple of cousins now in Lyon.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so my parents were trying to make it in Paris, and they, as the story goes, right, there's always somebody else, somebody, relative in the United States, that says you got to come here. This is a better place to make it. And so I was so young. I don't really have any memories other than, they told me that I was speaking French, and I was, the little stories like that they tell you about being a little kid. And I think I think they told me one story about that I wanted to break the TV. What I was, eu parto a televisão. That
Yeah,
was my that was my little story, but I don't really remember anything.
yeah, yeah. The other thing too that I found is the Portuguese are incredibly mobile. Um, living in a resort town, I lived in Figueira da Foz, which is the Costa de Prata. It's equidistant from Porto in the north, and
Yeah,
Lisboa in the south. And it's like 45,000 people during the wintertime, and it swells to over 100,000 during the summer.
oh
And
wow.
a majority of them, and it's funny because it depends on what month it is. Because in August it's all French and Luxembourg. They
Yeah,
all descended on the city, and a majority of them are Portuguese. They're expatriated to these other countries.
right.
But it's interesting how they will spend so much time in one spot, so work in another place, have a winter home or a summer home in another place, and I think what it does is it gives them a broader outlook on life and other cultures, and they absorb other cultures, but they never forget who they are either, which is very, very important.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think that unless you experience that, what you're explaining, it's hard to really know. If you're lucky that you get to travel, um, and you're traveling and you get to sort of really sort of sink your teeth into another way of living or another culture, um, instead of like you travel to a resort and you never experience um, the culture of the place. It's just different. It's like the last time I was in Portugal, I think it was a couple of years ago. It must be 2 years now. So we had a birthday party for my son, who's he's 12 now, and the great thing about that birthday party was we invited our extended family and some cousins, and we had French speaking cousins who only spoke French. We had Spanish speaking cousins who only spoke Spanish because they left Venezuela because of what was happening in Venezuela.
Mhm.
So about 10 new family members that I'm just getting to know now, who were growing up in Venezuela, and because of the upheaval and the way that the country had turned, they got up and moved to Portugal. And so now, for my son's birthday party, we sang happy birthday in different languages.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's when you said that, I was flashing back to the Coco Loco, which is a little hostel. It's like a hotel, but it's not really a hotel. It's more of a hostel hotel.
Yeah.
It's right on the beach and so on and so forth. And there's a cafe. I mean, you could kick a can from one cafe to another cafe, and every hotel has a cafe. And there are several times where you'd be just sitting there having a cup of coffee or a beer, and you'd hear people at tables, and they're a family, because you can tell how they're addressing each other. But one part of the table speaking in French, the other part responds in Portuguese, then the Spanish or the German, which it was absolutely amazing to see how this went on. And that's just something you don't get over here at all.
Yeah.
There was nobody speaking louder, thinking that if I speak louder, you'll understand me better. So
That's very, very common.
So where have you shown?
Well, I mean, I have shown in different parts of southeastern Mass. I've had a couple of unique sort of shows where I've I had one show right out of my grad school. I had a show in New York where I had to install an installation right in the middle of Soho, and it was right at the end of grad school. But it was definitely bigger than me that I didn't really understand what to do about it. I didn't understand how to parlay that experience or market that experience in a way that it would help launch my work in a certain direction. It was just kind of an experience. I was in awe,
Mm-hmm.
But besides that, I show locally where I can. So I seek out art centers. I know that there's a group of artists that I helped put together, this group called Snack.
Yes.
And so you know
okay.
some of those.
Yes. Yeah.
So you know some of those artists.
Mm-hmm.
And so we meet, it's kind of like a collective, and we seek out places to show, like the Narrows in Fall River, or in Warwick Art Center, or I think we've traveled up to Beverly. There's like a little gallery there. Wherever someone will have us. And those group shows are nice because it's just kind of keeps you sort of motivated and engaged enough that I want to go back in the studio. I don't want to show the same work. I want to and so I've done a bunch of those, and now because of the pandemic, I sort of seek out here and there, I'll do a juried show. I'll pick a juried show and submit my work because I want somebody to see it, some curator that has a connection to maybe a gallery,
Mhm.
in hopes that maybe they would respond to my work,
Right.
and then maybe that would lead to something else.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's kind of like what I've been doing, and now I've been trying to solicit even some solo shows, um, and that's not an easy thing to do. You have to just be willing to accept no, is just a very common response.
Hmm.
No, in the sense that, okay, I propose something, and in the sort of most gracious way, and then they might reply, or maybe they won't reply.
Hmm.
Maybe not at this time, or something like that.
Right.
And or maybe there's something missing. There's something missing in the body of work. Either it's a connection, or for me, I always have trouble with the written piece. The explanation is always a challenge, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The issue with solo shows in the last few years has been, it's more of an economic thing, because if a gallery is going to give you a solo show, it's like putting all their eggs in one basket. Where if you're in a
Right.
group show and it's 10 different artists, they have 10 different chances of selling at least one thing. Where with you, or a solo artist, they have no idea. It's an unknown quantity, especially if you don't have a track record. And then if you did have a track record, it's sort of bizarre. Why would you want to show here?
Right.
It's a really kind of a strange thing. Um, um,
Yeah. I
the
think
other
that,
thing now is people are just, the trend is no one's even bothered to hang a show now. It's totally virtual. And even though there are those virtual, those apps that takes you through the faux gallery, um, they're still clunky.
yeah.
And I was speaking with Don Wilkinson about, he says, I haven't reviewed a show since the pandemic started, because he says, you can't do it virtually. You really have to be in the presence of the piece. And even if they do an environmental, where you're just photoshopping, you're painting over a sofa or whatever, it's still, you've got to see the piece. Like your work, for example, I think it's impactful just seeing an image of it, but I can only imagine what it's like to stand in front of a piece of your work. I'm
Oh,
sure the experience would be totally different,
well, thank you. I totally agree with you on so many points. The group show, like I was saying earlier, is having a group of artists who you get along with,
Mhm.
which is not easy to do, because everybody has their own opinion, and not everybody's willing to do the work. You have to have the ability to take a step back. You can't, like, I would love to take all 10 or 12 artists every time that we do a snack group show and curate everything. But you can't. You just have to, all right, wouldn't it be great if we only, because it doesn't always work. The work doesn't always work together. You have to accept that it's not always going to work together. You can try. And so over the years, we've actually been around since 2008. And only this year we had shows planned, and
Mhm.
the pandemic hit, and we plan to go back. Um, but yeah, and it's funny because we've been able to minimize the drama, share the work. And that means managing a website. That means someone solicits the venue, and then someone installs, someone takes down, someone advertises. And we've been able to do that and have meetings. And, you know, I've always been on the, uh, I've always had the ambition. So we've done that. So what's next for us? We should, you know, we've been able to exist without a space. You know, what would it cost? What would it take to have a space? And I think that that's an intriguing direction for the group, because, you know, I was visiting Kilburn Mills
Mhm.
in New Bedford,
Yeah.
and there was a space open. I mean, they have tons of space, but they were seeking artists. I know that there's, oh, I forget her name. Klein.
Sarah Folger is the uh, art center manager, but Judith Klein had been at the back of the building for a long, long time. I believe her husband ran a business in the mill, and so she had the space. But they brought her up front, and haven't had a chance to get out there to see the new space.
Yeah. You know what? They made like a little wing of studio spaces. They look really nice. They're putting a lot of money into it. I think a lot of this was pre-pandemic. They have a really nice cafe or
Yes, the
bar.
Baco, I think it's called, the
Yeah.
bakery company or whatever.
Now, when I was touring, I toured the entire building. She gave me a tour of everything. I was like, this is overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm like,
How am I gonna find my way back?
it was impressive, and
Yeah.
there were some spaces that would just would knock your socks off. If you're a painter, there's a space on like the second floor. It's all windows. You see the ocean.
Yeah.
Right there. It's just a beautiful light. It's amazing. But I did see there was one that stood out. Somebody invested some buku dollars in making a large studio space. I mean, with walls that were, you know, it wasn't a gallery space, it was a studio space. And it just kind of struck me. I was like, this is really odd. This is a lot of work for an artist to invest this much, because this, you know, I'm like, I would love to know who the artist is, because, you know, you invest in that kind of space, because that's the value you put in your craft and your work.
And
as a
you're
sculptor.
making a living off of it as well.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe that's a good point. So you can do it. But like you said, like the solo shows are really tough. You know, even like right now, you know, I had proposed one for a space in Cambridge. I think it's called Gallery 263. And I got a really good response from my proposal. I created a narrative, the body of work. To me, it's consistent, but the response was they had something lined up. They want to carry my proposal to the next batch of proposals for free, and they were attracted to one piece in particular, right? And so, just as you said, you bring this up, I also start to see that they're looking for ways to maximize impact. Multiple artists, more group shows, because more group shows are more advantageous.
Right.
Unless, you know, I was listening to one of your interviews earlier. I think it was South Coast artists. They do studio visits.
Oh yeah, SCA. Yes. So Jill Law, and I
Right,
mean
Jill
they
Law.
were turned on their heads. That's their biggest event of the year to have. I mean, this thing goes from Tiverton, Little Compton, you know, Westport. I mean, it's a massive undertaking.
Right. And I think, yeah, I was listening to her talk, and I forget where I was going with this, but oh shoot, I lost my train of thought.
No, I'm sorry. No.
But yeah, so the group shows, that's where it's at for a lot of them. They're pivoting towards that. It's
Yeah.
where they can, oh, I know exactly what it was. You had mentioned that gallery in Fall River, the Goodwitz gallery at
Yeah, the oh God,
Bristol.
Grimshaw Goodwitz. Yeah,
I can never pronounce
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Grimshaw Goodwitz
Yeah.
gallery. And I remember what you said is that they don't sell work there because it's part of the
The college. Yeah, they're not allowed to. Yeah.
And as soon as you said that, and I said, maybe I've been going about this all wrong. Maybe I should be seeking more of those types of spaces, because to be honest, I'm not trying to sell the work, because the work is a little bit funky. It's not, it's hard. It's hard in so many different levels. It's hard because sometimes the materials, sometimes it's a little fragile, and then you go to sell something and it's embarrassing if something fell apart, right?
Well, you're not really geared to permanence on some of your pieces, right?
Right, exactly. So I'm building a narrative or an experience. The work can sometimes be ephemeral. And like you said, it's definitely different in person.
Oh.
But
have you
go
checked
ahead.
out the Fall River Museum of Contemporary Art?
I didn't know they had
Fall
one.
River Mocha. How familiar are you with Fall River?
I had a studio at the old Kilburn Mill years ago.
In Fall River?
Yep.
Okay. You know where Portugalia is? On Bedford
I
Street?
think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you remember the China Royal?
Now
Well, you're coming in onto Pleasant Street, and then there's that rotary, which is now a CVS. So that
Yeah.
rotary will flip you around to Bedford Street.
Sure.
Pretty much. So the first spoke is Pleasant. If you take a right, because you're going up to Flint. Doesn't matter where you are in Fall River, up or down, you always got to go up to Flint. Even if you're up, you got to go up to Flint, right? So that's the first leg. The second leg on this rotary, okay, is where Anderson Little used to be, which was a men's clothing. It was like one of the first warehouse concepts around here. Okay.
Yeah.
Right there is the Fall River Museum of Contemporary Art. Two young people. I don't think they're even in their 30s, or if they are, it's their very early 30s. They were just in. Do you get the Taunton Gazette? Oh, you're in Rochester, right? You live in Rochester.
Yeah, but we just moved. So we were living in Rainham.
Okay.
And we just moved to Rochester.
Right.
But that sounds like a new space. I've never heard of it.
It's about 2 years old, I think, maybe now.
Oh,
it all
absolutely.
started off with Fabric, which was their big event in Fall River. It's called Fabric, and a lot of Luso influence, because Michael Benavides from Portugalia is one of the benefactors. Jesse James, believe it or not, that's his performing name, but he does Art Walk, I think it's called. It's in the Azores. It's a really, really interesting concept. If you can get a copy of Coastin magazine, the insert for the Standard Times, because you're in Rochester, so that's still the Standard Times influence. Or just Google it, or go on to the South Coast Today website. Brandon Cabral, the photographer, was this week. Last week it was, I think the last name is Gould. It's it's a young couple. And let me tell you, it's one of those things where it's one thing, either they knew what the hell exactly what they were doing, or they had no idea what they were doing and they fell into it. Because that's generally what happens when somebody's successful. Like, what business plan?
Yeah.
I could make the rent. The plan was, if I can make the rent next month, we're doing okay. If I can make it the month after that.
Yeah.
And 30 years later, they're still like one of the biggest businesses in town, you know? But
Sure.
you should check them out because I think you'd really like it.
I definitely will. I mean, if there's anything that comes out of all this hardship this past year and the next year, there's going to be funding for places like that. Maybe they're funded. Are they funded by Mass Cultural Council?
Probably, because I mean, right now, thank God for the funding. Thank God that hasn't been cut out.
Right.
But you can't do it on your own. You have to have benefactors like Michael Benavides from Portugalia.
Right.
And they have several other kinds of benefactors. Like look at the Narrows. Bart Norse started that off 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It was a loose group. I mean, the weird thing with the Narrows is they became more of a music venue than an art venue. And I shouldn't say weird thing because they're like one of the finest music venues outside of Boston, you know, and they've played everybody.
It's you're right. I think it started out as like studio spaces, right?
Yeah.
And then it grew into a gallery, and then from the gallery they started having music, and then they expanded that, and they have all kinds of great acts.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking the top names in certain genres like bluegrass or folk or whatever. Yeah, it's the Fall River Museum of Contemporary Art. Just Google it; it'll come right up. And I think that would be a good fit for you. Now you're teaching, right?
Yes.
Okay, you teach where?
I teach at Barnstable High School.
Okay.
Cape Cod. So I have a little bit now. I have a little bit under an hour for a commute.
Mm-hmm.
These last 2 weeks we've been, doing it from home, so it's been a little bit easier in that sense, but hard to do it from the laptop. Yeah,
and the infection rates I don't know about there, but they've been going up everywhere in schools, especially. I don't know how long it's going to take before that bubble bursts and they're going to keep the kids home. I remember I worked up until I had some medical issues pop up. Nothing major, but I just haven't been able to go back to work since the beginning of December. I remember when they decided that they were going to go completely virtual at UMass, and the ceramics teacher came in, and she was babbling to herself like stunned. I mean, she was just like bouncing around in the bookstore, and she said, "How the hell do you teach ceramics online?" I said, "I don't know. How do you teach figure drawing online?" So I think, at the end of 2 years, you're going to have some trade crafts that you never imagined, and some perspectives that you never thought was going to get you through this kind of thing. How are the kids over there?
The kids they're amazing, to be honest. I mean, you're sort of, sometimes you only get 50% of your class, sometimes 70, on good days, if you're getting 80-90% of your class, it's good. The hard part is we've switched a couple of times. We've gone from hybrid, being in school, being out of school, being totally home. And I've always tried to, just in the same sense that I keep exploring my own work, I'm always trying to teach a concept or an art element in a different way, so that the kids, they can relate to it in some sense. Like, for example, last week, it was like a Friday when we found out that we weren't going to be in school, right? So all of a sudden, all the teachers have to scramble for curriculum to teach the kids. So we were planning to do something based off of Barbara Kruger's work, and she does, I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
Yeah, the name is ringing a bell.
She does very graphic work with black and white photography. It looks like an advertisement with white lettering across, and she'll have a message. And a lot of times the message is something personal, or it's something that's a little bit political, about social issues, things like that. And it actually worked out really well, because there's a brand name, Supreme, that all the kids like to wear. This right here.
Yeah.
And Supreme ripped off Barbara Kruger, as far as the lettering style. And then there was this.
I read about that.
Yeah, it was a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Supreme was trying to sue somebody else for ripping them off. And Barbara Kruger stepped in and said, wait a second, don't be a jerk. You ripped me off. We rip everybody rips everybody off.
Yeah. That's the highest form of flattery.
Right?
Yeah.
But the point that I'm making is that it's very relatable to the kids. I'm saying, look, this is the age that you're living in. Everything's been done. Everybody rips off everybody. Look at how Barbara Kruger responds, with her work. And I want you to just do something inspired by her. So I had the kids, take a black and white photo with their phones. They all have phones. And then create a little message using the phone as a tool. Mm-hmm. And it was some of the most powerful little works that they've done all year, and we didn't have the supplies, and for that week it worked. Well, it doesn't always work, but
yeah, well, necessity is the mother of invention, and sometimes doing just what you did is the answer is staring you like right in the face.
Yeah,
it is a tool. And it's funny because when I was teaching college level, they only saw technology as communication for pleasure. They didn't quite get that it was a working tool. It was kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
But after a while, they picked up on it. I'm going to start rolling this down to wrap it up.
Sure.
As I tell a lot of the people that come on the show, this is not your one and done. I'd love to have you come back again, because this time went by way too fast, and that's always a good thing. Because I've never really had a podcast where like, oh my God, I can't wait for this to be over, because it's like trying to pull teeth or something like that. They're always interesting, but some of them just go by faster than others. What's your next step, and to close it all up there?
Sure. Well, it's a crazy situation right now. Since we just moved, I had to I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about your listening to your interview with Jill. What's her last name?
Law.
And I heard, some of the artists had barns for studios. Well, I just gave up my barn.
Yeah.
I gave up a barn studio that I had for almost 20 years, like
wow.
15 plus years.
Yeah.
And so all of my work for over the years, everything from like drawings that I kept from high school, everything had to be moved into storage, because my new home, we don't have a garage and we don't have a barn. So in the next couple of months, I've got a budget to hire somebody to come and build me my next studio, probably my last studio, I hope, right? either that or I'm in shopping for studio space, which that's what I was doing at Kilborn.
Kilburn,
It's
yeah.
like, what do I do now? I was in the middle of making some new work. It had to be stopped. It had to be packed away. It's on my mind. And now I'm sitting in my living room, you know, basically singing that sad song, woe is me, what am I gonna do? And yet I'm teaching kids to, figure it out, that you've got tools all around you, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
What I should be doing is taking some of the digital things that I've done on my iPad, drawings, some of the saved video work. I could be working with video.
Hmm.
I could be working with projections. I could be exploring that as a media that would fit my narrative. I'm trying to pump myself up, Ron.
I know, I can tell. I can tell. No, no, no. I mean, I can tell. And you know,
But I do have,
when we close this up, I'm gonna give you a suggestion.
yeah.
Um,
I was
now
gonna say, I do have a show coming up in March,
okay,
April,
yeah,
at the Cultural Center in on Cape Cod.
okay,
So
all right.
it's a Dennis Yarmouth.
Yeah.
It's a really nice space. Have you ever seen it?
It's a pretty brand new space, isn't it?
I don't know if it's new, but I know it's really nice. It's got a big hall. It's got a couple of different little gallery spaces, like a vault.
I think I may have written an article for Artscope magazine about a show that was coming up there. It was a husband and wife, both artists, who had a show there, and it looked like
Yeah.
a pretty cool space.
Yeah, it's nice, and they do a lot of really great work as cultural centers and art centers. They're amazing in so many ways that they're reaching out. But I learned about it because they have like this mutual muse event every year where they pair a poet and an artist, which is kind of fun. And so I've done it twice, and it was a blast. I go to this event. There's like 70 people there. It's like 35 artists, 35 poets, and you get an envelope. You open the envelope.
It's like a fortune cookie.
It is. You've got this piece of writing.
Yeah.
Right. You have no attachment to, and you have a couple of months to make an art piece that somehow relates to this poetry, which I thought it was a fantastic idea. They've been doing it forever.
I think it's a great concept.
Yeah, it totally is, because like one of the hardest, I follow your work and I read what your work is about, and I get that, and like you're sort of looking at story, like what's the origin of the work. Someone hands you this story, and then you're like, oh, okay, I guess I have to figure something out. There's got to be something I can relate to.
Yeah. So whether somebody hands you an envelope with some words on it, or whether, well, and I went from being an abstract artist who was very proud to say that I painted in cold blood with zero emotions, and my only intent was to paint nothing, which is damn difficult for an abstract artist. I mean, because the moment you put a horizontal line, you've got a bloody landscape. The moment you put a vertical, you got a whole nother thing going. So, and that's what Pollock was doing with his automatic work. Stream of consciousness is to try to break that sort of thing. Well, I don't know if you followed the latest work. I've gone more to a narrative now, historic incidents.
Yes, that's exactly what I was referencing.
Okay. And my cousin sent me a photograph of my dad that I didn't even know existed, that happened to be on a calendar back in, well, they still do it. You can buy it's a cardboard thing with the calendar on the bottom and the pictures pasted on it, and it just happened to be from 1949, and he's standing in the hayfield in our family farm up in Canada, and I realized that was his that was taken the year before, 1948, when he was 18. And I realized that was his last year up there, because he was born here, but because of family situations, he went up there and lived with his grandmother and grandfather. Anyway, long story short, you're looking at this photograph, and it looks like there's a guy standing in a hayfield with a pitchfork.
Right.
And something I never kind of experienced is the pivotal nature of this entire thing. Everything from that point on, including me, began this whole different timeline. You know, he came down to register for the draft. The Korean War, somehow something happened. He met my mother, who had only been living here 6 years, I think, after coming back from Portugal. And then the ups and downs of that whole thing. But it was just kind of to find a genesis piece, you know, from that piece on. So I can imagine, like when you were talking about poetry, I think it was E.E. Cummings jumped into my head, upside down, so luscious mud puddles.
I don't know. Man.
You know, you get that in your envelope and you're like, okay, thank God I do abstract. Nobody's going to ever know.
Well, that's it. That's exactly what happens with that particular show, is that the artists are like, they're on pins and needles because they don't know what they're going to get. And you could get something that you relate to, or you respond to the poetry. And, you know, I think, you know, I think two, you know, the two that I did were, I think, pretty sort of easy to sort of understand. I did a little research. I did have to Google some things. And then I said, oh, okay, I understand what this is about. But there are some pieces of poetry that are hard, you know, hard topics. And if you're an artist that, let's say that you are an abstract painter, or maybe you just don't sort of work from that particular origin, right? You don't work from that kind of source. It can be difficult, I can imagine. Or even if you're, let's say you're an illustrator, let's say that what all of your work is some kind of illustration, and you have to illustrate something that's you know, could be troublesome.
It's a great challenge. It's a great challenge.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna wrap this up, and I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and definitely again I want to have you come back. And just very quickly, as far as Snack is concerned, I think maybe you should speak with Sarah Folger if you haven't already spoken with her at Kilburn Mills, because maybe that's what you guys need. And if it's a co-op, then it makes many hands make like the work. Everybody throwing in a couple of bucks is going to make paying the and then you create a gallery. Depending on the space that you've got, you might even have 1 or 2 resident studio spaces, small spaces,
right?
Because that's what they need down there. The last big gallery down there was Colo Colo, Luis Villanueva's Colo Colo. He was basically one of the very first legitimate, because Jim Charette with the Gunboat Gallery upstairs was it's just phenomenal artist, but he's like almost an outsider. Community-wise, he was an outsider. But there was nothing down there in the South End. And the problem with New Bedford, it's a peninsula. Yeah. So it's, this long sausage-like shape. There's really no center, and everybody's always trying to shove stuff into downtown. Right. And you've got Hatch Street in the North End, and now you've got Kilburn, which is really coming up on them fast. It might be something for you to think about. Yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna wrap it up, and just hold on there for a second. This is Ron Fortier again, thanking our guest, Filipe Miguel, for being on our show for another episode of the In Focus podcast. And we're not out of the woods yet. Unfortunately, we've got another year to go with this whole pandemic, but stay safe and be kind to each other out there. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.